Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Slavin, and I'm very excited to have with us today Gillian Anderson and Jennifer Nadel, who wrote the book, We, a Manifesto for Women Everywhere. I will start with their bios and a little bit about the book, and then we'll go into some questions. So Gillian Anderson is an award-winning film, television, and theater actor and producer, writer, and activist. She currently lives in London with her daughter and 2 sons. And Jennifer Nadel is an award-winning broadcast journalist, qualified attorney, writer, and activist. American-born, she lives in London with her 3 sons. So We, the way they've described it, is a movement for change, a manifesto for female-led revolution, a quiet, peaceful about-face that doesn't require the consent of those in power. It just asks each one of us, one woman at a time, to be the change and take the journey from me to we. And when I read that, when I was reading the book, I thought it was extremely timely, given what is going on in the world today with different leadership here in America, with Brexit in London. So I want to thank you both for being here. I know it's been a very hectic week with your schedules. Before I delve into the book, I wanted to discuss 2 ideas that I think that this Google audience would find of particular interest, and that's women in tech as well as pay equality. So how many people here in the room were fans of Scully in the X-Files? I have to raise my hand as well. And how many of you are familiar with the Scully effect? A few, just a few. So for those that have not heard of the Scully effect, it's believed that Gillian's character, Scully, who was a medical doctor, an FBI specialist, inspired many young women to pursue careers in science, medicine, and law enforcement, bringing an actual perceptible increase in the number of women in those fields. So that's pretty interesting, and I know we talk a lot here at Google of how do we get more women in tech, who are the role models, et cetera. And as we, how do we get more diversity and inclusivity? So I think Hollywood as well seems to be having a shakeup right now, and I'm wondering what are some of the factors that are helping to bring about that change, and what do you think we can be done to further stimulate change in Hollywood or in women in tech?
Well, it seems like things are being stimulated in Hollywood. You know, when someone like Patricia Arquette makes a statement at the Oscars, and Meryl Streep has been very, very vocal about pay equality in that industry, and overall, those are, having women very publicly speak out about the fact of it. And you all may know of the letter that Jennifer Lawrence wrote, which was beautifully worded. Those things, I think, on the one hand, it keeps the conversation alive, and also it emboldens women to have that conversation. It empowers them to be able to have that conversation for themselves. It's a complicated issue, and I don't know what the percentage is of female employees at Google, but I know in my industry, it feels like something one actually has very, very little control over, because at the end of the day, it's up to it's up to the writers, the casting directors, the producers, and as we all know, so often the roles of females to men not only are minimal, but they end up being women in their 20s when their love interests or their husbands are in their 50s, et cetera, et cetera. So but it is an ongoing and increasingly talked about conversation that I think that there are some changes in the process of being made, but.
And I think all of us can have an influence as well, because ultimately Hollywood is giving us what Hollywood thinks we want. So if we start changing what we want, which is part of what this book is about really getting to recognize what is intrinsic to us, what are our authentic wants and tastes are, and those that have been imposed and that we've just absorbed without even realizing that we have internalized, the male gaze, we have internalized, a very male, typically male way of looking at women. And as we start to shed that, Hollywood needs to make money and wants to make money. So, it's up to us where we decide to put our bottoms on seats.
Makes sense. So I want to delve into the book, and it's a very personal, and I would say deeply personal book, and I'm going to share a quote with everyone. It says, "Let us out of darkness from a place where both of us were suicidal and in despair, and into a way of life that has meaning and purpose." So sharing that, I'm just curious why you decided to write the book and share such personal stories throughout, and curious also in if you're reticent about sharing those vulnerabilities.
Good questions. I mean, we're quite extreme cases. We like to take things to extremes. And, I think both of us have been seekers since our teens. We've been up against the edge of things since then. And so as a result, we have really been obliged, the reason we're still here and able to sit in front of you, reasonably, sometimes articulately, not always, but is because of the stuff that we have distilled down and put in this book. That's why we're alive today, because we were obliged to really, really seek answers. And, and the reason we wanted to put those answers down was I think that it's a gift in a way if you've had no option but to look for answers. But many people live with a level of misery and pain, many women in particular, that it just isn't necessary to live with. And, if we look at rates of self-harm, Gillian's got a good figure on that, and addiction and eating disorders and depression amongst women in particular, we have an epidemic. So something is not working despite this amazing, society that we've created for ourselves. Something is going badly wrong. And, so that was one of the things that we wanted to address.
And also the book is based on 9 principles, which are essentially tools or universal values like honesty and humility and courage and trust. And but one of the foundation principles, actually, the first one is honesty, which goes throughout all of the other principles, because unless we can really, really get honest about what's going on for us, where our sorrow is, what the truth of our lives and what works for us is, then it's very difficult to then step out of that and into another solution. And so in asking readers to be that honest in their process, it became very important that we too were willing to get honest about some of the stuff that's gone on for us. And, it's been interesting the last week because I speak in the book about a couple things that I've gotten honest about. One is periods of time where I've suffered from massive panic attacks, and also with my struggles with parenting and how hard I sometimes find parenting. And in this last week, a lot of the headlines has been Gillian or celebrities with mental health issues. Part of what we're trying to do with this book is to talk about them and the solution to those things that bring up panic and anxiety and uncertainty and fear and the desire to eat 6 tubs of Haagen-Dazs or spend 15 hours gaming every afternoon, or whatever it is, that is our escape. Part of what we talk about in the book are ways that we can start to wean ourselves off those things and do things that bring much more meaning in our lives. And so it's interesting how, in being honest about some of the things that I have gone through, it then becomes a negative, there's the negative twist on it, which is part of what we're used to being bombarded by so much negativity, when actually it's a means to an end, ultimately, if you look at it that way.
Will you share a little bit about how you came up with the 9 principles? I'm sure at some point there were maybe more than 9. How you whittled them down?
Such a good question. Such a good question. What we found, we kind of put everything that we wanted to say. The book really takes the reader on a journey, and it starts off, as Gillian said, with honesty and with our relationship with ourselves, and then it finishes with kindness, which is about how we engage with the world at large and how we go about helping to be a part of bringing the changes that need to be brought so that our society is more compassionate and fairer and more equal. So we kind of put everything down and we just thought, what are the essentials in here? And often they were similar words. You know, we had a long debate about kindness or compassion. You know, what should the ninth principle be? You know, so sometimes it was kind of, you know, something that was close but not quite. So we had to pick and choose. But in terms of the 9, they kind of revealed themselves, I think.
Well, also one of the things we wanted to do was to, you know, to use the positive side of the principle that we're talking about. So courage, for instance, is actually really about anger and resentment and the things that we're holding on to that we can't quite seem to let go of, and really digging honestly into those things and being courageous enough to look at the things which actually eat away at us on a daily basis. You know, those little hurts that maybe we haven't let go of, or the person that we haven't talked to in a few years, or those areas where we end up getting very tightly closed and not wanting to deal with, having the courage to then to face them and to get honest with what our own part in that dynamic is. And so so courage is actually a lot about resentment, and it's the principles are the positive side of maybe trickier things to deal with.
And one of the things that you recommended in your book, in addition to following the 9 principles, was meditation. And I personally continue to hear how wonderful meditation is. I have attempted many times. I have apps on my phone that are supposed to help with meditation. I do yoga, and I still have not personally gotten something to stick. And if you'll just share a little bit about what your personal meditation practices are, and any advice for us on how can we find our own. I think that those of us at Google, we're traveling a lot, we're busy, there's a lot going on in our minds, so I think finding that practice would be very helpful.
And I think it's so important because so many of us are so identified with our thoughts that we don't realise that that's not who we are. You know, our thoughts are just our thoughts, and there is, you know, our true self resides, you know, in a silent place underneath our thoughts. But I found meditation impossible for a long period of time, because I would go, even at that little bit at the end of the yoga class where you're just meant to lie still, that would be torture, because I would feel like I was lying with a swarm of angry wasps that were just going to come and sting me if I lay still, which was my thinking, you know, those attack thoughts that we all have. And then, you know, a friend suggested just try 2 minutes, and I was like, what's the point of 2 minutes? You know, I'm an extreme person. I like extreme big answers, and it worked, because anyone can find 2 minutes, and you can set it on your phone, and it doesn't matter how much pain it is. But what that 2 minutes did was it started a habit, you know, and meditation is a habit. And once you start really small, don't stretch beyond where you can. And, you know, we describe in the book, we start with suggesting that practice. But a lot of the time we have to kind of scrape away and heal a lot of our wounds, because otherwise it is torture to sit with ourselves. So it's further on in the book that we talk about how to deepen that practice and stretch it out to, you know, I do try and do 20 every day.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But I started meditating when I was in high school initially, and but also extended it into periods of time when I was drunk. You know, now it's a very different practice that I have. But one of the things that used to drive me insane was if I didn't have the candle, if I wasn't facing the right way, if I didn't have the right cushion, then it didn't feel like it was perfect in some way, and or that the experience of the meditation was as deep as it could have been. And then I was away filming something, and the only viable place to meditate was on the kitchen floor next to the refrigerator. And I had one of the most extraordinary meditation experiences of my life, and it was you know, purely a gift to show me that I can kind of do it anywhere. I can do it anywhere. I can do it on set. I can do it in hotel rooms. I can do it. I don't need to have all those perfect environmental things to have it work for me. So.
And also, you talked about having it on your phone. It's kind of been co-opted meditation, and it's become another thing that we have to do. Have I done my meditation yet? Have I done my exercise? And actually, it's not about doing, it's about being. And if one's doing it to get an end result, then you're kind of shortchanging yourself. And if you can just trust, so often we need to know what's going to happen, but if you can just trust that process and trust that those millions of people who've done it through the centuries know something, then it will start to work.
I'll find 2 minutes before going to bed this evening. I mentioned that I thought it was an interesting time in history right now, and women, I think, are mobilizing more and more with marches, with strikes, et cetera. And from reading the book and a little bit more about both of your backgrounds, it's clear that you are both feminists and I think strong role models for many women out there. And I'm wondering what your hopes are for the women's movement and, in writing this manifesto and et cetera.
Well, it's interesting you talked about the timing, because 2 years ago when we started writing it, Gillian had this very strong sense that it should be called a manifesto, and everyone was like, women don't want a manifesto, it's too political, it's too dogmatic, no one cares. And Gillian just had, I think because, for many reasons, but that meditation, when you meditate regularly, you intuit. She's got a very strong intuition, that's what I'm trying to say about my writing buddy. But turns out 2 years on, no one is saying we don't need a manifesto, unfortunately. No one is saying, why have you written a manifesto for women? Unfortunately, it's all too clear that we do need something, and and our hope is, we're all going to need to be resilient. Activism is no longer a choice; it's now an essential. All of us who have the capacity and the voice need to show up, particularly for those who are too scared and most at risk. And if we're going to do that, we need to develop resilience, because just as you can burn out from work, you can burn out from activism. And there's no point going into it if you're driven by your ego, because, often there are no quick results. And often it is just about showing up and saying, I care, I believe, I'm here, I'm not going away. And so, sorry, this is very... Anyway, so this book is really a blueprint. It's a handbook and it's a manual. And one of the things that we really hope will happen, that has already started to happen, it only came out a week ago, and it's very inspiring hearing back that it is happening, is that women will gather together with other women and start circles. The image on the front of the book, I don't know if we have an image of the book. Yes, there. Is a circle. So gathering together with one or more other women and having the conversations that are in the book, doing the work that is in the book. And then you'll see there's a link. The circles, there are 3 circles linked on the cover, and then linking up with other women and growing and growing and growing. So I hope that it will be very relevant, and we hope that women will find other women, whether, in the workplace, online, school gates, going into, whatever age, schools, old people's homes, and just starting conversations, forming connections, because whenever 2 or more women are gathered together, amazing things can happen.
Do you have any role models today that you look at as we think about how to mobilize, or who you're having these circles with?
One of the most amazing young women out there today is Malala Yousafzai, and how incredibly courageous and articulate she is, standing up for education in schools at the cost of quite a lot, and in the face of quite a lot, in a way that we certainly don't yet anyway have that experience in our apparently free countries.
And as we think about impact, I think a lot of us at Google think about impact at scale, because our company is all about reaching people at scale. And I'm curious if you have any suggestions for those of us here who do want to have a larger impact of what you think we can be doing at scale to make a difference.
Telling it as it is, not shying away from the truth, and providing, a platform for other people to organise and to connect. That's one of the things that we've been looking for is a way of, women joining together face to face is essential, but how can we all join up? So many of us wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and just that's the moment when we actually want to connect with someone else. And that's the moment when it's not appropriate most of the time to connect with someone else. So if, you can come up with a way.
I'm often up at 3 a.m. So.
All of us.
I've got two answers to this question. One, my first response was kindness is contagious. And we really, really need more kindness in the world today than ever before, I think. And it is contagious, and that can scale up. But also, we are interested in creating a community of women online as well as in person. And so much of that has to do with funding and sponsorship and ideas, ideas from people who know how to make that happen, to create a safe place for women to communicate about things that are not just important to them and their experience with this book, but also communicate, in an altruistic way about how they are going out into the world and showing that the change that they're working on the inside is having impact on the outside. And we say women specifically for the community because, there's a lot of violence against women out there, and there's a lot of women who experience that on a daily basis, and creating a safe place for them to be able to talk openly and feel like they're not getting further abuse is a really important thing.
Yeah, trolls online are it's definitely an issue. So the manifesto is obviously a manifesto for women, but I'm curious, do you think your principles apply equally to men, and why is it not a manifesto for all?
Yeah, absolutely, and all the men we know who've read the book love it and say, what about me? And the truth is that any man can read this book and get a lot from it, and if you take the cover off, there's a really anonymous thing. So if you're embarrassed about reading a manifesto for women, you guys, just take the cover off. But yeah, the principles are universal. They apply to everyone. But, for the reasons that Gillian said, we need to start with women. Women do 75% of the work across the globe, earn 10% of the wages, and own 1% of the property. We need to start with us. And also because, a lot of the time as feminists, we're fighting for access to 50% of a system that doesn't work. A system that has left us with facing runaway climate change, hate crimes on the rise, depression on the rise, self-harm on the rise, inequality growing, things that we know, are not okay, and yet our system doesn't fix them, it exacerbates them. So part of our hope for the book as well is that it's not just about trying to get 50% of a broken system. It's about a paradigm shift. It's about co-creating a world that works for women and for men, because I think men are as trapped by our existing structures because they're really about power. They're really about units of labour that traditionally have been male, and so no one needed to take account of the fact that they may have responsibilities beyond the workplace, but most men today do, and most men today want to. So it's about together saying, as we were saying about Hollywood, we've got to say it in every area, this is not what we want. It doesn't work. Actually, we want equality. Actually, we want fairness. Actually, we will take home less in our pay packet so that we can take care of those who are sick or who aren't able to earn in the way that we are. It's about co-creating a fairer world.
One thing you discussed was a gratitude practice. I find that much easier than meditation. And I just thought it'd be fun if you would share with us what was in your gratitude practice yesterday.
Well, yesterday was a snow day. So I had a lot of gratitude yesterday. I had gratitude for pajamas and snow and a hotel room, which sometimes is really nice. And I mean, most of the time, my gratitude has to do with the simplest things. You know, one of the statistics in the book, I believe, if I've got this right, is that if you have a refrigerator, you are richer than 75% of the population. You know, so grateful for, you know, a lot.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I had the snow because I love the snow. I've got my son with me, so that's a huge source of gratitude. I found cabs, even though I was told there would be no cabs. I found them, and the drivers were all lovely. And for me, those moments of kindness, those moments of human connection, often, you know, just little things like buying a newspaper, you know, from someone and forming, you know, a human contact, not just throwing the money and taking the goods, but actually connecting. You know, love is all around if we're open to it.
We have time for, this will be the last question. What's next for you after writing this book?
Aside from trying to start a movement, I'm going to go and write my second novel, maybe even finish my PhD, and I'm making a film for the Green Party in the UK.
Immediately next is actually a big lump of nothing, which I have been asking for a really long time, and a series of what on the one hand might be unfortunate events have actually turned into fortunate nothingness. And because I've been pretty much either on a plane, on a set, or with my kids for years, and hearing myself say, I've got to slow down, I've got to, you know, and I've been given this space and time to clean out my closet, clean out my purse, explore my neighborhood, you know, but one of the biggest things is actually, I do a lot of work speaking up about human trafficking and modern day slavery, and one of the things that drives me a little bit crazy is that the busyness of my schedule means that I can't necessarily be on the ground or be as physically involved as I'd like to be. So that's partly what I'd like to do, is to get physically more involved.
That sounds like an aggressive and busy nothingness. Is there
Every once in a while?
Good spot.
any part of the nothingness, like sitting on a beach or hiking or meditating?
I'm sure there will be. I might have to be taught how to do that.
So I just want to thank both of you for being here with your busy schedule, and I hope that we do start a movement. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.